Hello everyone and welcome to the latest Scots Whay Hae podcast, and it's a podcast of two parts. In the second part you'll be hearing some readings from Out There, the anthology of LGBT writing that came out at the end of last year. And for just now we're going to talk to the editor of that anthology, Zoe Strachan. Hello Zoe.
Hello Alistair, it's very nice to be here.
And I think we're going to start by talking a little bit about the inspiration behind the anthology. Because you, correct me if I'm wrong, seem to be the kind of driving force about getting it all together.
Yeah, it's been a bit of a labour of love for me. It's something I've been interested in doing for quite a long time. And I suppose the roots of it come in early reading experiences when I was growing up, the looking out for that kind of representation of LGBT characters, which when I was a teenager I did find in the library, but I found them in books like A Boy's Own Story by Edmund White. I found them in 19th century French novels, and I certainly didn't find them in a Scottish context at all until they weren't totally not there, but it took me a very long time to come across them. And by the time I was a student, or a little bit, I suppose it had been published in the late 80s, Tony Davidson's anthology And Thus Will I Freely Sing had come out. And I just came across it really by chance in the library and thought, oh my goodness, here we go. There are people in Scotland who are writing these things, who are creating these characters, or who are expressing their own identity in non-fiction pieces. And after that there was a book called The Crazy Jig that Joanne Winning edited in, I think, 92. And then later on, a book edited by Joseph Mills that was about LGBT characters, but not so much about LGBT authors. So I felt there had been a bit of a gap for a while, and I became interested in doing something about it, mainly because I'd done an event at the Ullapool Book Festival, and I was reading from my then work in progress a novel called Ever Fallen in Love, which has the protagonist is gay, and we had a big discussion about where were gay characters, why were there more out lesbian authors in Scotland who are really well known, Val McDermott, Ali Smith, Jackie Kay, Carol Ann Duffy, people who are, have done such a huge amount for the visibility of LGBT writing and LGBT characters as well. But there didn't seem to be a commensurate amount of male writers who were out and creating these characters. And we were chatting about this, a lovely discussion, typical Ullapool, very warm, very open. And I said in a kind of fit of enthusiasm, that's it, I'll definitely do this. I've wanted to do this anthology, I'll definitely do it. So off I went and wrote up a proposal and pitched it to a publisher who said, that's lovely, that's a really lovely idea. That's not very commercial. I thought, okay. And I kind of tried, I didn't punt it around a lot, but I sort of investigated it and, was getting the typical response, which is understandable, that anthologies don't sell, it's taking a bit of a risk.
Okay.
There you go. But I never quite let it lie. I always thought, this is something I'll come back to, I'll get this off the ground eventually. And then when it did happen, it happened very quickly. I'd mentioned it in passing to Adrian Searle at Freight, and he said, oh, actually, I think we could do that. And then I saw an advert for from LGBT History Month, who were giving Cultural Commission grants, and I thought, and it was like the day before the deadline that I saw it, and I thought, oh no, but I stuck in an application straight away, got the funding, Freight were up for it, and then just powered through, wrote to every author I knew, tried to get a call for open submissions disseminated as widely as possible, and got a really lovely response. Every single author that I wrote to got back to me promptly and enthusiastically, and they all sent me some work. One author didn't, only because he wasn't writing, he was concentrating on music. Everyone else straight back, really supportive, and that was so reassuring, because I thought, actually, this isn't something that's outdated and unnecessary anymore. These authors want to support it and want to put work into it, although they've all got, the people I was approaching in the first instance have very successful careers and don't need to be supporting a wee anthology, but they really did, and so they sent me good work as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And the response, I suppose, confirmed the kind of reason for doing it in the first place. Yeah,
it did. And the response from new writers too, getting submissions from writers that I'd certainly never heard of, even through my experience of editing New Writing Scotland for the past 3 years.
Yeah.
People who maybe hadn't sent their work out before at all. So it's actually, I mean, quite, in a way, quite an emotional editing process. My criteria would, you know, I suppose only really had one condition, that I wanted the work to be good. It didn't have to reflect gay lives or gay themes. It just had to be, the author had to identify as Scottish and LGBT, but otherwise I just wanted good work. And everything I got was illuminating in some way or another. You know, some pieces were clearly maybe the first thing that somebody had written, very personal, very, very moving, some of them, very funny and very explicit, others, I have to say. But again,
is it an uncut version, is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's what I'm thinking. There might be. We could have done a follow-up, kind of 50 Shades of Queer. But again, that was reassuring too, that people wanted to send their work to this, and often with nice covering letters saying, "I'm glad this is happening. You know, I'm excited about this." So that kind of support was very helpful, because it's, you know, it is a big project and you're doing a lot of reading. There's a lot of kind of organising, and Freight were very good about all of that. But it helped to have the enthusiasm from potential readers as well as writers there.
I've spoken to at least 2 people who said that they've been moved to write not the first thing they'd written, but the first thing they'd actually sent in. You know, so that in itself, I think, you know, if that
great.
has any, you know, effect down the line, that someone actually puts pen to paper or whatever the equivalent is these days. What do you think about the wider reception of it, in a way, compared to how you would, you know, in your foreword to the book, you say you found Tony Davidson's book kind of hidden away in the library, not hidden away in the library, but, you know, it was a book that you didn't know about yourself. Do you think the reception of out there would be different to how Tony's book was back in the day?
I wonder. I mean, it's hard to tell, because I don't know how that was received at the time. You know, I know I've spoken to a lot of people that it's meant a lot to personally. I've been very pleased with the response to Out There, the Scots Whay Hae review amongst it, which was very, very, very heartening. I guess I had a bit of a fear that people would say, well, so what? Or why are you doing this in the 21st century? Is it necessary? And I thought it was, and I was certainly sort of prepared to get the gloves off and defend it. But I'm pleased that people actually embraced it and said, this is interesting. There are things here that are different from anthologies that were published 20, 30 years ago. We're seeing different representations, different lives. Things that just didn't particularly seem to happen in literature very much, you know, whether that's talking about LGBT couples that are older, civil partnered, or people for whom it's only one facet of their identity and it's not actually part of the story at all, and they just happen to be gay. Lots of different things that I felt that I hadn't quite seen this in writing before, so I think the contributors did a really, really good job.
I think the impressive thing is the breadth of experience that's in the book, as you say, from all ages, from all backgrounds. It's just, you know, an anthology of different people that happens to be collected under the LGBT banner, if you like.
Yeah.
And the readings that we have later on are from it was at the launch of LGBT History Month.
Yes.
And certainly everyone that was at that seemed to, you know, just be absolutely heartened that this anthology was there.
Yeah.
Interesting, I think, looking at the history of the anthologies, if you like, that Scotland was perhaps seen as different to the rest of the UK in the way that it portrayed gay characters. Do you think that's fair? I know you wrote an essay back in 1999.
Yeah.
But I hate going back to what people have written years ago, but it was a really interesting essay, and it looked at just that, how gay characters were portrayed in contemporary Scottish literature. Do you think that's changed?
I think it's changing. I think it's changing. I think there are things that have been missing for particular reasons, and one of those reasons, you know, I suppose there's two sides to two sides to every story. I think class is a factor in terms of what people have been able to write at particular points, and Scotland is lucky to have such a vibrant tradition of working class writing. But I think there's points where that maybe hasn't been quite in a position to include LGBT representations in the past, or there have been other, and you could say the same for feminist writing and, and other things, writing by authors of colour. Sometimes it seems as though the kind of culture of reception can only take one perceived minority, even if it's actually a majority at one time. So I do think that it's changing, maybe not quite as quickly as I might have assumed.
Yeah.
I think things have changed a lot socially, equal marriage, all of those things, but we've got these top-notch out gay male Scottish writers, Christopher White, Ronald Frame, and others, but we don't have somebody who's sort of Val McDermott level of sales and profile. And I wonder why that is. Is it just chance? Is it what they're writing? Or is there still a bit of a barrier to that? I was
thinking about that, and just in terms of the way that Scotland has an incredible range of women's writers. And for a while that just wasn't the case.
Yeah.
And absolutely, it's just flipped in its head. And whether that is just chance, whether it's well, I don't know. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, there's also that thought that maybe people were always writing and not getting published, and we do still discover women writers that have been just sort of awfully neglected in the past for various reasons. And that discussion at Ullapool, certainly one of the questions was, just do these things exist and they just weren't published? And I thought, well, probably. I can't imagine there weren't men who were writing this stuff really through the centuries, but maybe hiding it away or burning it or or whatever for fear of being discovered.
Well, I think in terms of Scottish writing, and it's something that Christopher White talked about in Gendering the Nation, his book, looking at Scottish literature, was that Scottish literature in particular, but many aspects of Scotland, were so obsessed with defending its Scottishness or its right to exist, that areas of it, it became just one homogenous thing rather than the subtleties that you saw in other literature. Yeah,
I think that's definitely the case, and I think Joanne Winning comments on that in an essay that I think was in the Edinburgh Companion to Contemporary Scottish Literature, just that I suppose that there becomes a dominant agenda, and again, for good and bad reasons, that's the thing that people are driving towards, and it seems that there isn't quite space in that for all the other facets of identity that might be, it's, I suppose we've all got a Venn diagram. We're not only one thing at once.
Exactly.
We overlap. And actually, I think that a lot of the referendum debates were very positive about that, and actually, in terms of legal steps forward and social justice, I think Scotland has come a long way very quickly. And it seems that people in Scotland, if you can go by polls, have changed their mind about things really quite quickly, and what might have been quite conservative or religiously driven before actually has moved forward. I mean, one of the things that I wanted to do with Out There was include these little bookend essays by Bertold Schoen, the critic, and Jeff Meek, the historian, just to give the work a little bit of a wider context, what had happened before, what's the legal background that maybe prevented things being published and that makes things different now.
And I think that's actually quite exciting to think that there might be undiscovered writers out there, or from the past that we just haven't been discovered yet. I think he talks about putting the book in context, and again, that's one of the really interesting things about it. You have these essays that bookend them, and you also have the writers' biographies are more than the normal. Was that? I take that was a deliberate step.
Yeah, I wanted to. I mean, I didn't want to enforce that on people. If they don't want to talk about their sexuality, it's fine. But I was interested because I think that's one of the questions that I wanted to ask. Does does this affect what you write? Because I mean, if I think of myself as a writer, it definitely does. It's really of vital importance, you know, whether it becomes obvious in a piece or not, whether it's an overt theme or not. I know it's part of what kind of drives me, and it's reflected in different ways. And I guess out of personal nosiness as well as thinking that it might illuminate things for others, I wanted to give people the opportunity to say that. And I think some of the comments there are really lovely and interesting. You know, Ronald Frames says a great thing about, you know, you're always becoming somebody else than the page.
Yeah.
You know, and Ali Smith's got a lovely, in a way, sort of typical thing about the difficulties of writing, and then that it's sort of further but delightfully complicated by identity in different ways. So yeah, I thought that was I'm glad that or I hope that that's sort of worked, or that people get something out of reading those
Definitely.
biographies, rather than it just being, you know, born in, likes cats.
I think it does. I think it works well with the pieces. You know, I mean, some people have obviously embraced it more than others, but Paul Brownsey says an interesting thing. I think he says, until people stop asking why he has gay characters, it's still going to remain an issue. And is that something that you agree with?
I think so, yes. And again, one of the really nice things about Out There is that we've had quite a lot of events, and last night we had an event for LGBT History Month in Waterstones in Edinburgh, and the discussion there was interesting because I think there is a split in the LGBT community, and I use that word advisedly because I think it's a kind of tricky one to use at all. There are people who want all these things equal, you know, of course, who's going to say that equal marriage is a bad thing? But in the discussion last night, there were a lot of people in the audience who were saying, but we are different, we do have a different identity that is forged through our experience and who we are and different things, and we should think of ways of holding on to that rather than actually being subsumed in this, you know, kind of,
again,
in a way, you know,
everyone being the same,
everyone being the
same.
Yeah, and everyone isn't, and I find that a really difficult question to answer myself, because I've spent my life thinking, oh, I can't wait till we get to this point, as Paul says, you know, where we don't have to label everything. But actually, then I think, but you can't make everything, you can't kind of bland everything out either, because there's a bit of social control in that, and the here we go, get married, adopt children, or whatever, you know.
I guess people. It should be, everyone should be allowed to celebrate who they are instead of having to defend who they are, which is what happened.
Exactly.
How did you go about deciding who was going to be in it? I mean, there is a nice balance between some are very well-known names and people I'd never, you know, I think, as I say, maybe written for the first time.
Yeah.
How did you decide that? Or did you just go on the quality of the work?
Well, I made a sort of wish list of the people that, I mean, a lot of them people who'd been really important to me as writers, and whose work I'd really liked. And I think people who've just done such tremendous things for Scottish writing and LGBT writing. So that's your kind of, you know, Christopher White, Jackie Kay, Ali Smith, Val McDermott, all these people. And I wrote to them directly and said, will you send me a piece? And then for the open submissions, I thought just one as much as possible to choose from, and we got a lot. You know, we did get hundreds of pieces, probably. Not, you know, just fewer contributors. You know, a couple of people, you know, sent a few things. And for that, I just went on the quality of the writing. And there were a lot of people that I really wanted to submit as well, you know, and maybe kind of gave a nod to and said, please send me something. And sometimes I included the pieces, sometimes I didn't, which is always the difficult thing about being an editor, is you know that that in the end you
have to make some tough
have to make some tough calls. And although you're going for excellence of writing, sometimes you want a little bit of diversity of, you know, of theme or subject, and a balance of poetry and prose and that kind of thing. So there were some really hard choices, you know, that I think you always think it's going to be tremendous fun editing something, but then you end up at that point where you've got 10 pieces that you really, really like in front of you, and there's only space in the book for 5 of them. And, you know, those are tough calls, and I had to just sort of keep putting them aside, sleeping on it, figuring out what I thought was the most memorable piece that really stayed with me. But I'm really pleased with what's in there. You know, I think I think for me I made the right choices, and I hope that there are pieces that speak to different people in different ways, that there is a range of work. So it's always hard editing, but I was lucky to have good stuff to be choosing from.
You were told early on that anthologies weren't commercial.
Mm-hmm.
It strikes me, there's been a few events off the back of out there already.
Yeah.
And a book like this will hopefully have a long life because of that. I mean, you can do, events with different readers and...
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we've been doing events since before the book came out. We did things in Pride House and the Commonwealth Games, had a really successful event there, and hopefully it will be used. I think the association with LGBT History Month is great because it's something that can be brought out in different ways and used in workshops and taken into schools, maybe not all of the pieces, but some, a good number of them, that sort of thing. So they're a good support in terms of using it as something that can raise awareness and have an educational side in some ways too.
I think that's what literature does possibly better than any other art form, is that people, if they hear a story that they can identify with, or a poem that they can identify with, it can inspire them to think, well, one, I'm not alone here, but also then I can go and express who I am as well.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what you hope to, because we talk about things changing, but again, one of the things that's come out in just about all the events, there's been someone there who maybe works with, does youth work or something like that, and gives you the grimmer side of the story. And that is the, I remember being that kind of teenager where you're looking in the library and you're just, desperate to find something that sort of says, this happens, this is fine, here you go. And you've got television, you've got internet, you've got much more representation than there ever was before, but there's still something about having it in the pages of a book, I think, and hopefully it's just as well as that, hopefully it's just a good read for anyone, no matter what their sexual identity.
It's a fantastic read. There's some incredibly moving and, as you say, very funny. All life is there.
Yeah.
Now that you've done one 10 years down the line, would you do another? Or
now you're asking. I don't know. I suppose it'll depend what happens in the interim. It was quite interesting to do it alongside the referendum and thinking about identity in these ways. So who knows? Maybe I'll hold off, see if there's another referendum.
That would be good. That'd be a good timely thing. Well, Zoe, thank you so much for talking to us.
Oh, thank you.
And you're going to now hear some readings from out there, and we'll be with you very soon.
After the first time I read it at the launch of the anthology, a very nice couple came up to me and said, we have always wanted to go live in the countryside, but, I think the prospect can be a little scary, and they're not wrong. Have you met the boys? Hilda says it with a kind of heavy emphasis that suggests euphemism. We're standing on her lawn, and the bright grass is up to our ankles, but the mower won't start. Every spring, the same game. My shoulder aches from pulling the cord, and I would like Hilda to go away. They're called Douglas and Mark, and Mrs. Anderson says they're civil partners. Isn't it exciting? They bought the house at the top of the brae. Douglas is a musician, and Mark is Canadian. A professional Canadian? Well, I think it's great, stimulating, by the time we caught up with the modern world. What about me? I say. I've been here for years. And Hilda shakes her head and gives a little laugh, almost says something. I can tell by the way she sprints away to deadhead the daffodils that she is embarrassed. Hilda has forgotten that I am one of them, or maybe she thinks lesbians don't really count, buggery being so much more vivid. Or could it be that I don't count because I'm on my own? If you don't have sex with anyone, maybe your orientation becomes academic, like Middle English, fallen out of use. I pull the cord, quick as I can. The mower farts and dies. I live here now, in a village at the head of a loch, encircled by hills. I ran from the city and a bad relationship that took Houdini skills to escape. My first priority was to be unseen, and I found a cottage with high hedging, and so only got to know the populace gradually. They are discreet, wholly Caucasian, unanimously straight, as far as I can tell. I never lied about myself. I made the effort to come out early and come out often. It's Ms. actually. And my former partner, she never. First Christmas, my immediate neighbours asked me to a drinks party. It was mostly their retiree friends, bridge players and golf enthusiasts. We drank gin and tonics and ate cheese footballs. Men wore blazers with shiny buttons. The kind of gathering that in my old life would have passed as a retro theme party. I was pushing my chit-chat about when a woman in a gathered skirt and spangly cardigan said to me, "And what does your husband do?" First question, not my name or dwelling place or even my own job. "I don't have a husband." I said it with too much volume, too much velocity. We stared at each other, silence spreading thick. But you do get worn down. When a plumber or bank teller calls me Mrs. Cairns now, I let it go. Tell myself it's just an honorific like Madame. And you know, here in the outlands of middle age, we women start to converge. I become Mrs., wear the odd floral pattern. They cut their hair shorter, wear lower shoes. We can see each other well enough, but in the eyes of men and the young, we mist and we blur. I still love it that no windows look into my windows, no footsteps squeak over my head, no troubling screams break the night by the owls and foxes. But I found that the more space and silence I created, the louder grew the voice of me, prattling away in my head by turns dull and neurotic, no getting away from her. I took up gardening work to root myself in something. Trite, true. I had genteel clients like Hilda Trench and Delphine McHugh, and Dr. Fowlers, Ian and Jan. Eccentric people with rhododendron ring gardens and ramshackle Victorian villas, the kind of Scottish houses once run by cheap servants. Pinterest boards on shabby chic have nothing to teach these people. They deeply understand the expressive pointillism of mould, the sun-tattered curtain lining, the dwindle of peeling wallpaper. As I travel my route of mossy lawns and knotweed-lined burns, people tell me news of the boys. They have thrown themselves into village life, I hear. Douglas is giving free fiddle lessons to the primary school kids, and Mark the Canadian has been prominent in the campaign to keep the little library open. One bright evening, I'm driving along the single-track road that rings the far side of the loch when I see them out walking together. Douglas, dark and stout in a mossy green tweed jacket. Mark, slim and dressed in jeans and thick jumper. Between them, a red setter strains at the lead, a shine like water running over her coat. I slow the van and start to edge past, rolling down my window. "Lovely evening," I call. They agree and move past. I want to say more than that. I want to give them the secret sign that I am not like the others. I stop the car and look at them in the wing mirror. They keep walking away into the low sun with their beautiful dog. They don't notice I've stopped. I switch my eyes to the shapes that the wind makes on the surface of the lawn.
School, my nickname was a giraffe, so I'm not entirely sure whether this will very generous introduction from Zoe. I'm actually not going to read the piece that's in the anthology, though I'm extremely happy and flattered to be included in it. The reason for that is that it's actually an essay, and it's quite long and it's quite dense. It's also difficult to read in public because it's about a very powerful photograph of a man who's just died of AIDS. I don't particularly want to read that this evening, but it's there in the anthology for you if you want it. So I thought instead I would simply read a few poems, just a couple of poems from the various collections that I've published over the last 25 years or so. Much of my work is about sexual orientation and what it's been like to be gay and Scottish and growing up in Glasgow in the 70s and 80s and 90s. I think I was still growing up in the 90s, and I'm still growing up now in a sense, I suppose. And so this first poem comes from my first collection, which was published in 1994. In its own way, this collection chronicles some of the prejudices that gay people were subjected to back in the late 80s, early 90s. At one point in the late 80s, there was a journalist called John McLeod who was employed from time to time with Glasgow Herald, and then Glasgow Herald as it was known, and he penned a vituperative attack on gay people written from the standpoint of the Free Presbyterian faith, the Wee Frees as we sometimes call them. I'm sure that the Free Church's attitude to homosexuality has evolved since then, so please just regard this as a historical artifact, a historical document. So it's called Three Wee Frees, and it's a kind of riposte to, it was a riposte to that piece of journalism. It's called Guinea Pigs, which is Scots for honey pot. There was this wee free, right, and he was dozing off in a pew with the minister going on and on. Sitting in his horns, he was just like at school when he played Guinea Pigs. Guinea Pigs was when one of the boys tried to lift you up by the oxters and gave you 3 shakes. If your horns went off flabby like you were a right worst idiot and a bench shot into the bargain, a woofter man. If your horns stayed pit, you were a penny pot or pig, and you've got a shot at the lifting. Well, there was this wee free, right, sitting tight on his horns, scratching his earths as he snoozed, dreaming of Guinea Pigs, when all of a sudden it's Jesus' turn. Aye, Jesus, Christ. He sees Jesus doing some lifting. Jesus, the hen merchant, feeling for sweet oxters and sour yams. Well, blow me if he didn't choose the biggest harry hoof of the lot. I'm telling you, his horns were everywhere. Bloody whirligig he was. And the wee free was fair gobsmacked when he delused that the guy doing the jack-in-the-box was the wee free himself, and Jesus saying to him, "It's your turn, new son. It's the nippy sweetie's turn." Now this is the next part. It's called Lot, or Another Wee Free. There was this wee free, right, name a Lot, my wifey, Mrs. Lot, and 2 braw lasses. Stayed ever close to the drum, pure mental they were, tell you why. One day, Lot was haying a henny, just back for the brew, the missus laying it after him about this and that, when all of a sudden he sees angels of the Lord dawning down the road. With a bunch of buggers dealing the glad eye. Who pops Lot and gobsmacks the whole shebang? Doesn't he stop to ask himself if folk are angels and buggers, or which is which? But bundles the one who wings up the close and offers his wings to the others, even with logic, eh? Well, the buggers didn't have time to get out of the shop, because Lot was out with a chainsaw 2 minutes after. He got barrel and the missus was turned to a pillar of salt. The last wee free. There was this wee free, right? Doing Glasgow for a day at the virtual reality show. Asks for a New Testament visor and turns up Romans 1:27. You ken the bit about men doing shameful things with other men. Paul calls them bangsters, scorners, sneaky and ill-hated. And the wee free was expecting a bit of stoning at the very least. Men of God putting out some E. And all of a sudden, what does he see but Davy and Eric on their knees before the Lord to sell, horns joined together making vows, aye, and the Christ Jesus blessing and smiling, saying, "Let him that has lugs in his feet hearken." Black affronted, the wee fee was, complained to the manager and brought his readies back, 50 pieces of silver. Back in the 1980s, there were times when I was walking down Buchanan Street with Eric, who's actually in the audience now, and I felt that I wanted to hold hands with him, and it wasn't really possible. It's probably more possible now today. Maybe not everywhere in Glasgow, but in some parts of Glasgow you can do it, I think. I was looking for a kind of a way to write about this, and I just needed a performance of A Midsummer Night's Dream by Shakespeare. And in that play there is another play put on by the comic characters, Bottom and Peter Quince, and they put on a little play of Pyramus and Thisbe, where Pyramus and Thisbe communicate with each other through a wall, through a little chink or hole in the wall. So this poem is full of the language of that play. And there's also a memory of seeing a wonderful exhibition by David Hopkins, in which there's a painting, a portrait of Christopher Bishop and his partner Don McCarty in Malibu, California. And to me, they represented, I suppose, a kind of liberty, a kind of freedom that just wasn't available to us then. So this poem is called The Wall. Look at the wall, the sweet and lovely wall we carry with us in public places. Even in meadows when we rest it for a second on muscular buttercups, its tininess glimpsed from the distances of outer galaxies is not as small as a monstrous little voice I used to whisper to you through its chink. And in the streets of Glasgow, where we set it down despite the looks, to share affection over lattes and Versace suits, we can hear the awkward avalanche of lime and mortar evolve within its frame, as we kneel down and seek out chink and speak our cherry words knit up in air and stone. Even here, on Pear Blossom Highway or Garraway Hill, where you can barely see it for the Hockney colours and sentimentalists mistake it for a rainbow, it is a wall that bears our mottos of restraint. And in the Japanese storyboard of Chris and Don's Malibu interior, where even the wicker chairs are clearly gay, at ease with their own maturity, wall balances between the pockets of our cargo pants as we meander through, fearful of pratfall putty on the pinewood floor. Some say chink offer us the virtue of cubist perspective, the silk forest of your earlobes blonde, still baby hairs. Polaroided and collaged in a cakewalk of mismatching edges, our groins grow a wall, exciting textures are described, but no one ever asks us what it weighs. Others tell us to ignore it, drape our bodies in a magnetic web of invisible embraces, a shimmering virtual cloth of Christian complexity, beyond the deconstructive powers of Peter Quince. We touch our asses' heads like cats, pick up our wall and walk. True, chink's lynx eye offers us a precious parsimony of moments. The time the slits of our lapels smile to fill the whole of that slim orifice, the time your pinky stroked the whisker of my orange tawny beard, my purple and grain beard, my French crown colour beard, and no one noticed. But those who see our wall and label it know about its chink as well, the slight pucker of its lips, which taste of cold, chipped tile. Name it only for the fuckhole of Bully Bottom's rude mechanicals. Everywhere we turn, we find out moonshine. Smash wall. Smash the person of wall, and the person of pure moonshine. Thank you.
It's really nice to be included in LGBT History Month, and also to be with LGBT youth as well. Outside it is cold, but in here it is warm. And also very nice to see the folks from Scots Whay Hae recording this, and if you've not come across their website yet, I encourage you to have a wee look at it. You'll find lots of recordings and blogs about Scottish literature, Scottish music, past and present. This is the face at the window, the wave of the hand. Fiona glanced across Grosvenor Gardens at her apartment. "I always look up at the window of our lounge when I reach the gardens," she told the policeman later. "I'm not sure why. Habit, I suppose. But it was more than habit. It was the satisfaction of reaching home, the satisfaction of living in Edinburgh's West End, the sight of their flat waiting for her on the other side of the gardens that separated Grosvenor Crescent from its not quite mirror image, Lansdowne Crescent. She had walked from Haymarket Station, a canvas bag advertising the Edinburgh Book Festival full of groceries, her messages slung over her right shoulder, her briefcase containing her tablet and the spreadsheet she would work on that evening weighing down her left. This time next year, Fiona thought, I won't be burdened with work, and she felt a quick rush of excitement that could have been mistaken for fear. There was a steak in Fiona's bag which she intended to cook with mushrooms, red wine and shallots for Margaret and her to share. They would eat it with the cold boiled potatoes left over from the night before. Fiona wondered if Margaret had used all of the shallots and decided that if she had, they would just have to do without. It was only Wednesday, but she was Friday night tired. There was a headache threatening at the back of her eyes. If Margaret wanted onions, she could get them herself. Fiona paused midway along Lansdowne Crescent and looked with satisfaction at the apple blossom on the trees, the branches nodding over the railings of Grosvenor Crescent. Too long, she supposed, but ashamed to get them trimmed now when they looked so pretty. One white and two pink, like a bride with her bridesmaid, Fiona thought, not for the first time. And she unconsciously bent her fingers so she could feel the pressure of her wedding band. That was when she looked up at the top floor window of the converted townhouse where she and Margaret lived and saw the face at the window. The face was a quick white presence. A hand gave a cheery wave, and then the intruder turned and vanished into the darkness of the room beyond. Later, when Margaret asked why she hadn't waited for the police to arrive, Fiona said, "You know how slow the Edinburgh police are." But the truth was, although she dialed 999, asked for police, please, and gave the operator her name and address, the thought of waiting did not cross Fiona's mind. She didn't think of it at all. It was only chance that Paul on the ground floor was leaving his flat at that moment, tassel-haired and puffy-eyed, like the cartoon of a man suffering from yet another hangover. The two households had been on frosty terms since Paul's friends had spilled out into Grosvenor Gardens in the early hours of St Andrew's Day and let off a volley of fireworks to shouts of, "On your cell, Rabbie!" As Margaret had remarked later to Murdo and Grant, occupants of the Middle Landing, they were in such a state they didn't know their birds' night from St Andrew's Day. Fiona put a hand on Paul's elbow, steering him towards the stairs in what he later described to Jackie the barman as a neat dance move I wouldn't have thought the old girl had in her. "There's an intruder in my house," Fiona said. "Are you sure it isn't your friend, Dr. Gupta?" "I think I would recognise my own wife, Paul. This person is as white as I am. Whiter." Paul took out his iPhone and jabbed at the buttons, but Fiona put a hand over his. "I've already phoned the police." "Would you like me to wait until they get here?" Paul said, resisting the urge to look at his watch. There was a straightener with his name on it waiting at the Cambridge bar, but as he told Jackie later, the old bird looked a bit green about the gills, and he wasn't sure she should be left alone. It was on the tip of Fiona's tongue to ask Paul if he was a man or a mouse, but she sensed the question would be counterproductive. We could wait all day on the police while whoever it is takes the place apart. Fiona's fingers tightened on Paul's arm. Do you have a baseball bat? No, Paul said. Football's my game. 5-a-side to the lads every Sunday afternoon. A football's not much of a weapon. What about a golf club? My old man was mad keen on golf, Paul said. It kind of put me off. Useless. Fiona jogged up the stairs to the door of her apartment, and after a moment's hesitation, Paul followed her. He whispered, I really think we should wait for the... But Fiona had already unlocked the door and stepped into the apartment, and Paul's only option was to wait outside like a coward or follow her inside. We've got a nice place up there, he told Jackie the barman later. Lots of storage space, nice and clean too, no stir under the beds. Ask me how I know that. Jackie obliged, and Paul said, because we checked every nook and cranny of that flat. We looked in every cupboard big enough to hold a trained monkey, and a few that weren't. Do you know what we found? Nada. Nothing. Not a soul. There was nobody there. There was somebody there, Fiona said. She was too shaken to cook the steak, and so Margaret made it, trimming the fat before she put it on the griddle, a low-calorie tactic that Fiona thought spoiled the flavour. The policeman treated me like I was an idiot, and as for that waste of space, Paul on the ground floor, I wish he'd made violence heat. Margaret laughed, but her forehead creased with concern. Thank goodness Paul went with you. Imagine if there really had been someone there. There was somebody there. The second time Fiona saw the face at the window, the hand raised in a cheery wave, she didn't bother to call the police at all or knock on neighbours' doors. She took the stairs 2 at a time, her heart hammering as if it was trying to escape her chest. Fiona locked the door of the apartment behind her so that the intruder could not escape, and went swiftly from one empty room to the other. There's no point in hiding, Fiona shouted. But although she spent the next hour searching, she found nobody. September stripped the leaves from the trees in Grosvenor Gardens, and October hardened the ground, strangling the last of the flowers. Fiona and Margaret strolled along Lansdowne Crescent, arm in arm, swathed in winter coats. I hate this time of year. Margaret's voice was muffled by the scarf wrapped around the lower half of her face. No colour, everything dead. Your coat is pretty bright, Fiona teased. Her hat was pulled low over her eyes, but the cold air was pine needle sharp and her sinuses stung. Anyway, I like the winter. No life without death. And it means we can light a nice fire when we get in. She glanced up at her flat, and then suddenly she was running. This time, Fiona had almost been able to make out the features of the person waving from the window. It was someone she'd met before, she was sure of it. She tore off her gloves, threw the keys to the building with numbed fingers, dropped her bag and ran up the stairs. Fiona! She could hear Margaret on the landing below, but Fiona didn't slow her pace. She reached the 3rd floor, flung open the door of the flat, and descended into the blackness her mother had always said would claim her. The moon-white face from the window sailed towards her, and as she fell into the dark, Fiona recognised it as her own. The oncologist was unsure how long the tumour had been nestling against Fiona's brain, but she was certain that Fiona was a very fortunate woman. If your friend hadn't... My wife, Fiona corrected. Your wife, the oncologist smiled. If your wife hadn't insisted on a CAT scan, the outcome might have been very different. As it is, I think we caught it on time. Fiona stood at the sitting room window, watching the trees in Grosvenor Gardens dip and swoop against the breeze. It had been the recurring hallucinations as much as her blackout that had alerted Margaret, though she still berated herself for not noticing the tumour's symptoms earlier. Silly, Fiona thought. She would never have got such a quick diagnosis without Margaret's persistence. She smiled, remembering the uncharacteristic way Margaret had insisted on using her professional title, Dr. Gupta, and the quick responses it prompted. Fiona looked beyond the trees to Lansdowne Crescent and saw Margaret walking home, a bag of shopping in each hand. She looked lithe and strong, despite her 5+ decades, her hair tied back from her face, revealing the cheekbones that had helped to snare Fiona over 30 years ago. I am lucky, Fiona thought, and the prognosis is good. We could have another 20, even 30 years together. Some people live to 80 and beyond. Why not us? She stepped closer to the window so Margaret could see her from the street below, waved her hand in a cheery way. Thank you.